For 7 years, Lee Soo-young wore a golden badge and a practiced smile. Trained to be the face of Joseon on North Korea's most prestigious international rail line. But behind that smile, she was watching. Reporting. Being watched in return. When her colleague Oki disappeared without a word, she understood in North Korea, even silence can get you killed. This is the story of a woman who crossed a river, 2 jungles and 4 countries, not for adventure, but for the right to simply exist on her own terms. If these stories matter to you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us bring these untold stories to light. I still remember what my instructor said the day I first put on this uniform. From today, you are the face of Joseon. The face of Joseon smiles with calculation, walks with calculation. Understood? I was 19. Pride swelled in my chest so fast, I had to bite the inside of my lip just to keep quiet. I grew up in Sinwiju, North Pyongyang Province, on the banks of the Amrok River, a city that faces China's Dandong with nothing but water between them. On clear mornings, you could see laundry flapping from apartment windows across the river. At dusk, streetlights blinked on in long, orderly rows. As a child, it was just scenery. Until my mother started pulling me away. Whenever my eyes drifted toward the river, she'd grab my hand. She'd lower her voice, glance around, then speak. Soo-young, be careful even looking over there. Understand? I nodded. I never asked why. The thought didn't even occur to me. In our neighborhood, that was simply the air we breathed. My father died in a coal mine accident when I was 12. A tunnel collapse. 27 men, buried at once. That evening, the Inmanbanjang, the neighborhood watch captain, came to our door. My mother said nothing. She just slowly closed it. That was all. After that, she was up every morning at 4, cooking rice. She packed lunches for me and my younger brother Sakal without sleeping in once. I grew up watching that silhouette in the pre-dawn kitchen, the smell of smoke, the clang of the iron pot lid. That was my childhood mornings. When I spotted the recruitment notice for train attendants at 19, I ran straight to my mother. She held my hands for a long moment before she spoke. Soo-young, you have to pass. No question. I gripped her hands tight. Mom, what if I don't? She squeezed my hand once, hard. Don't even think about that. That was it. Those words carried me all the way to Pyongyang. The day of the physical exam is burned into my memory. A basement somewhere in the city. Under fluorescent lights, people in white coats called us up one by one. They examined the whites of our eyes, checked if our teeth were even, our nails clean. The girl beside me leaned close and whispered, I heard they already know your grandfather's job. I said nothing. I pressed my lips together, terrified a sound might slip out. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Walking out of that building, I looked up at the sky. Her voice echoed in my head. No question. Those 2 words. The selection process was brutal. The training center hallways smelled of disinfectant, sharp and cold, always. We spent 12 hours a day refining our posture, practicing our smiles, correcting our pronunciation. Nights were for memorizing Chinese vocabulary. I kept a small notebook, filling it edge to edge. If I woke up in the middle of the night with something I'd missed, I'd sit up and write it down. One night, the girl in the next bunk opened her eyes and said, Why are you so obsessed with Chinese? Can't sleep because you're hungry? A short laugh escaped me. Just, never hurts to know. She snorted. Stop wasting time and sleep. 6 a.m. tomorrow. She wasn't wrong, but my hand wouldn't stop. A year later, when the acceptance letter came, I called home. A long silence on the other end of the line. Then my mother said, quietly, Good, you did well. 2 words. That was all. I hung up and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. My golden badge caught the fluorescent light. I gripped the cold edge of the sink with both hands. 7 years passed. That train became my whole world. Hundreds of runs, same seat, same uniform, same smile. Then one spring evening, on a southbound run, I stopped at the end of the corridor. The sun was going down. Across the river, Dandong's lights were blinking on one by one, yellow, white, stretching into the distance. Without thinking, my fingers tightened around the drink tray. The teacups rattled. Then came the footsteps, low and dragging, close behind me. Comrade Lee Soo-young, Cho, the state security monitor assigned to our train. His voice landed right at my back. If you have time to sightsee, check the passenger cars. I lowered my head and walked. Sweat rose on the back of my neck. The cups rattled again. Inside the car, my colleague Oki caught my eye and blinked. "You okay? You're white as a sheet." I pulled the corners of my mouth up. The universal signal for fine. We both knew it wasn't. That night, back in the dormitory, I pulled out my notebook under the covers. My hand kept moving. A voice surfaced from 7 years back, my old bunkmate at the training center. "Stop wasting time and sleep." Back then, she'd seemed right. But in that moment, nothing fit my hand better than that notebook. 7 years on this train, so why did those lights stay in my eyes so long tonight? I told myself I didn't know the answer. But maybe my body already did. A few months later, I found myself standing in front of a door I was never supposed to open alone. I first noticed it in my 4th year. It was at the very back of the train, a small iron door beneath the coupling between the cargo and passenger cars. Waist height, a rusted handle. At first I assumed it was a ventilation hatch or a maintenance access. Nobody ever brought it up. I never asked. There were things on that train you were better off not questioning. Then came the spring of 2025. A late-night southbound run. Most passengers were asleep. The corridor was silent. During my routine walkthrough near the coupling, something felt off. Cold air was bleeding through the gap at the bottom of the door. The cabin heat was running fine, but through that crack, something damp and cold breathed out. I crouched and pressed my hand against it. My fingertips went numb. I took out my key ring. At the very end hung an old key I'd never used. Given to me on day 1, along with one instruction: do not enter. No explanation offered. In our world, asking why was considered impolite. The train shuddered over a rail joint. The light above me flickered and held. I stood under it, staring at the key in my palm. Cold, heavy. I could put it away. Walk back, let it be. But my hand moved first. Before the thought finished forming, the key was already in the lock. Click, louder than I expected. I held my breath and checked both ends of the corridor. Empty. My heartbeat filled my ears fast, then faster. "Close it," said a voice in my head. "Close it now and forget this ever happened." Every word of it was right. But my hand was already pulling the door open. The smell came first. Human smell. Sweat. Old cloth. Something stale, like food left in a sealed space for too long. I stopped myself from covering my nose. The space was barely big enough for one adult curled tight. The ceiling so low it nearly brushed my head. When the flashlight swept the interior, I went still. On the floor, a worn plastic bag. Chinese made. Inside, an empty water bottle and a crushed bread wrapper. And beside it, a depression in the dust, where a body had lain narrow at the shoulders. A woman. Or a child. Someone had ridden this train across the border. Hidden in this space. I didn't report it. I set the bag back down. Closed the door. Locked it. Walked into the corridor as if nothing had happened. The wheels drummed steadily underfoot. I never opened that door again. But in my mind, it never closed. Not long after, I started seeing myself differently. For 7 years, I'd been this train's face. Smiled at foreign guests. Brought them drinks. Asked if they needed anything. And after they stepped off, I told the monitor everything. Who lingered too long at the window? Who whispered to their companion in Chinese? Every detail. I wasn't the face of the state. I was its eyes. Standing at the dormitory mirror, I touched my golden badge. 1,000 times before, I touched it without thinking. But that night, the cold traveled past my fingertips and up into my arm. For the first time, the badge felt like it belonged to someone else. Like the woman wearing it might not be me. On my next run, Cho fell in beside me. "Comrade Lee Suyong, you're not looking well." I smiled. "I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well." He tilted his head. "Didn't sleep? Something worrying you?" "My mother's been ill." He looked at me, not with concern, with calculation. That gaze moved across me, slow and deliberate. And I held every muscle still from my feet to the top of my head. Nothing moves. Nothing shows. I learned that day exactly what it costs to do that. That same evening, Oki caught my sleeve in an empty stretch of corridor. On the way out, "Suyong, what's going on with you lately? Something's different." 4 years together. I looked into her eyes. She'd always known when I was lying. So I didn't smile this time. "Honestly, I'm not sure." She glanced out the window, dark fields rushing past, then back at me. "Be careful. Things feel off." I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. She gave my shoulder a quick pat and walked ahead. Watching her go, My hand closed around the key ring in my pocket. The smell of old metal soaked into my palm. A few weeks later, Oki didn't come to work. It was near the end of summer 2025. The first 2 days, I told myself she was sick. Our schedule was relentless, but people occasionally missed shifts. Then on the third morning, a stranger was sitting in her seat. Stiff and forward-facing, like her first day on the job. I gripped the handrail and my knuckles went white. Nobody mentioned Oki. That was what terrified me most. 4 years side by side and she was simply gone. Not one person asked where she'd gone. Every face in that corridor wore the same expression. I saw nothing, I know nothing. You know that look. When pretending becomes habit, it stops being pretending. It settles into your features for good. I'd been wearing that face for 7 years myself. At lunch, I sat next to the new attendant. She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Uni, the one who used to sit here. What happened to her?" I twirled a chopstick of noodles. "Don't know. Neither do I." It came out smooth as water. That was the part that frightened me most. On the fourth evening, alone in the dormitory bathroom, I turned the tap all the way up. Let the water cover everything. Looked in the mirror. I was smiling. Nobody else in the room. Just me smiling without knowing it. 7 years of training had taken over. My face was running itself. I turned the tap harder. Cold water hit my palms. Still smiling, I leaned over and splashed my cheeks. Only then did the corners of my mouth drop. About 10 days later, I was carrying documents toward the rear cargo section. When my feet stopped, voices, beyond the metal shelving. Cho's low, flat voice. And another deep, unhurried, unfamiliar. I hadn't planned to listen. My feet just wouldn't move. I pressed my back to the shelving and held my breath. The unfamiliar voice spoke first. "The woman, was that handled?" Cho answered, quiet and even. "No chance she saw anything. We confirmed the route she used." Footsteps faded. I stayed there, spine against the metal, unable to move. Only my pulse in my ears fast, then faster still. That night, I didn't open my notebook. No Chinese vocabulary. Just the ceiling and a single fluorescent bulb. Flickering above me, unsteady, off rhythm. What had Oki seen? Had she found the cargo section first? Or was it something else entirely? No answer. Just the blinking light. Around that time, my mother called. Her voice had thinned. The moment I pressed the receiver to my ear, I felt it like something essential had been stripped away from it. "Suyang, I'm out of insulin." My throat closed. I knew about her diabetic complications. Numbness creeping up her right ankle. Her vision blurring at night. 1 bottle of insulin at the Zhongmadang, the local black market, cost as much as 10 kilograms of rice. 10 kilograms was what she lived on for a month. And now she needed that for a single vial. "Mom, I'll be in Sinwiju next week. I'll get it." A pause. "No, I'm fine. You have enough to manage." After I hung up, I pulled the blanket over my head and stayed there. The thinness of her voice wouldn't leave me. On my next run, 3 Chinese guests were eating in the dining car. White rice, meat dishes, broth smelled drifting into the corridor. I walked past with my eyes down, wondering what my mother had eaten that morning, or whether she'd eaten at all. On the way home that evening, I stopped at the Zhongmadang and asked around for insulin. A woman pointed me toward the back. The vendor told me the price. My mouth went dry. 2 months of my salary, combined, would barely cover it. Walking home, I stopped at the mouth of an alley. Evening air, heavy with the smell of rice being cooked somewhere. A child crying somewhere else. Everything pressed in at once. Oki, gone. Cho's voice in the cargo section. My mother's insulin. It all collapsed into a single knot in my chest. This can't keep going. Something had to change, but nothing could. That was the most terrifying thing of all. Standing in that darkening alley, I let myself think it for the first time. Vague, barely formed. Not what was at the end of that alley. What was at the end of this country? I never found out officially why Oki was taken. Ideological impurity. That was the stated reason. But I knew the real one. She'd seen something, and so had I. From the moment I heard Cho's voice in the cargo section, I couldn't shake the feeling that my name might already be written somewhere. No chance she saw anything. He'd said, and that sentence scared me more than anything. Because the person who decides there's no chance can change their mind. Without needing a single reason. After that, every step down the corridor made me aware of what was behind me. My footsteps grew quieter. Cho's gaze seemed to rest on me a second longer than before. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe, but I couldn't tell the difference anymore. And maybe wasn't enough to calm me down. Around the same time, my mother got worse. The feeling in her right foot was fading, she said. Her foot went numb every night. Her vision kept dimming. The complications were deepening. I knew what happened to diabetics who couldn't get insulin on time. I didn't want to know. But I did. One evening, I stood at my dormitory window and stared at a few distant lights blinking beyond the buildings. I thought, is there anyone else in this country, right now, thinking about running? Probably. Somewhere in this night, someone is trying to cross a river. For the first time, that thought didn't frighten me. It settled over me, strangely quiet. I sat at my desk and opened the notebook. The one packed with Chinese vocabulary. In a narrow margin between the words, I began writing in letters barely visible to the naked eye. Pyongyang to Sinwiju by train 5 hours. Sinwiju to the Amrok River on foot 20 minutes. Which stretch of the river ran shallowest, in which season, on which bank? 7 years on this route, everything I'd overheard, everything I'd clocked with my eyes. I pulled it out and put it on paper. My hand wouldn't stop. 2 in the morning. I closed the notebook and stared out the window for a long time. Just darkness. My fingers went slack. I ran a hand across the cover, the same notebook I'd filled with Chinese words for 7 years. And now, this was inside it too. Only one thing left before this could become real. I had to go to Sinwiju. I had to see my mother. On the following month's schedule, I chose a run with a Sinwiju layover, a route with a half-day gap. My hand trembled slightly as I made the selection. This might be the last time. The alley outside my mother's house was exactly as I'd always known it. Weeds growing at the base of the stone wall. Power lines sagging over the neighbor's roof. I walked slowly, not knowing when I'd walk it again. My mother opened the door. Her face had thinned. I stepped inside without a word. She made Dandong guk, a fermented soybean soup. The kind that's been the heart of Korean home cooking for centuries. The earthen pot bubbled softly, white steam rising from the bowl. I took in every sound, every smell, and told myself, remember this. All through the meal, she watched my face. Eat. You can't be eating right out there. My throat was locked, but I swallowed it down. This might be the last meal she ever cooked for me. When she stepped into the other room, I stood alone at the stove. The iron pot was still warm. I pressed my palm against it, closed my eyes, opened them. She came back holding a small cloth pouch. Take this. Emergency money. Mom, I'm okay. I have money. Enough. Take it. She took my hand and pressed the pouch into it. Her hands were rough, they'd always been rough, but rougher now. I held the pouch without letting go of her hand. She looked at me a moment, then glanced down. What's gotten into you today? I didn't answer. I pressed my cheek against the back of her hand. Dandong. Old soap. The smell of her. A few seconds, that's all it was. She said quietly, make sure you're eating. Still holding her hand, I said, Mom, I'm doing okay. She nodded once. I know. Just that. 2 syllables. But something about it was strange. She wasn't looking at my face. She was looking at my hands. Maybe she understood. Maybe she didn't. I looked up at her. She was smiling, and I didn't want to know what that smile meant. If I'd understood it, I might not have been able to leave. At the end of the alley, I turned the corner and didn't look back. One glance, and my legs would have given out. The packed dirt of Sinwiju pressed under my feet. One step, then the next, only forward. As I passed the utility pole at the alley's end, the power line above swayed gently in the wind. That was the last time I saw her. It was December 2025. My last scheduled run, a night train from Pyongyang to Dandong. That morning, I stood in front of the dormitory mirror and put on my uniform. Pinned the golden badge, breathed in twice, slowly, so my fingers wouldn't shake. Then I picked up my notebook, the one packed edge to edge with Chinese vocabulary, and slipped it into the inner pocket of my jacket. That was everything I took. The train left Pyongyang station at 8 in the evening. Not many passengers. A few foreign guests, a few North Korean men, who looked like they were traveling on official business. I made my rounds, drinks, cabin checks, the log. Cho walked past me twice. Both times, I lowered my head without breaking stride. My palms were wet the entire time. Once we cleared Sinwiju, I started counting. Sinwiju station to the Amrok River rail bridge, 15 minutes by train. I knew that by heart. Hundreds of runs over 7 years. 15 minutes. That was my window. Outside, the lights of Sinwiju disappeared fast. I'd watched that skyline my whole life, low buildings along the riverbank, trees stripped bare by winter. As it faded behind the glass, I tried not to blink. I needed to hold it. I couldn't afford to lose it. I might never see it again. When Sinwiju was fully behind us, I set the drink tray down and walked slowly toward the back of the train. Nobody looked twice. Crew heading to the rear was routine. At the cargo coupling door, I checked my watch. Nearly midnight. I took out the key ring. A strange stillness came over me. I should have been terrified. Instead, everything went quiet. I'd spent months thinking, writing in this notebook, holding my mother's hand and walking away. I was here now. The rest was just motion. Then my hand started shaking, really shaking, for the first time. The whole key ring rattled as I reached into my pocket. I pressed my right hand flat with my left. Exhaled slowly. Checked both ends of the corridor. Empty. The old key slid into the lock. Click. It sounded like a gunshot. I stood frozen, waiting for it to die, then pulled the door open. Cold, dark air hit my face all at once. Outside air. December night, bleeding up through the space between the train floor and the rails. I climbed in. The door closed, and the world disappeared. No light. Total dark. Cold metal on every side. I reached up and touched the ceiling. Stretched out my arms and touched both walls. The sound of the train filled that small space, heavy, rhythmic, thundering through the floor and up into my bones. I pressed my back against the wall and drew my knees to my chest. I thought of the impression in the dust I'd found months ago, the outline of someone who'd lain in this exact spot. They'd been here too, in this same dark. They'd held on. The train slowed. The moment I felt it, I closed my eyes. The bridge. The Amrok River Rail Bridge, the only crossing between Pyongyang and Dandong. I had to already be on the Chinese side by the time we cleared it. As we rolled onto the bridge, the sound changed. River water, rising from below. The Amrok in December. For the first time, it was real water moving under all this steel. I bit down on my lip. Then footsteps. Directly overhead. Someone walking the corridor. Slow and steady, passing right above my head. I stopped breathing, pulled my knees tighter against my chest. The cold wall pressed into my spine. The footsteps faded. The river kept going below. The wheels kept hammering the bridge. Thud, thud, thud. My mother came to me. The rough skin on the back of her hand. The smell of old soap. I pressed my own hand against my cheek in the dark, and kept it there. The train picked up speed. The bridge was behind us. It took a long time before I could exhale. When I did, tears came. Not because I wanted to cry. They just came silent, in the dark. 30 minutes to Dandong. The notebook was useless without light. I sat in the blackness and recited what I'd memorized. I am a Chinese tourist. Where is the bathroom? Where is the train station? My lips moved without sound. As the train slowed into Dandong, I got to my feet. My legs had gone numb. I braced both hands against the wall. Found the handle by feel, and timed my exit against the noise of people moving in the corridor. I undid the top 2 buttons of my uniform, wrapped the scarf around the lower half of my face, pulled the dark coat I'd been wearing underneath closed over everything. First step onto the Dandong platform. The air was different. Somewhere nearby, something was frying in oil. The platform lights blazed. People moved in every direction. Nobody looked at me. I walked into the crowd. Just another person. The first place I found was the station bathroom. I went into a stall, locked the door, and took off the uniform. 7 years in that deep navy jacket. I unclipped the golden badge and held it in my palm for a moment. Small, cold, a fleck of gold. I set it on the floor in the corner of the stall. Putting it in the trash meant someone might notice it later. Under the uniform I'd worn a plain dark long sleeve. I pulled the black coat back on, looped the gray scarf from my bag around my neck, and looked in the mirror. An ordinary woman. Anywhere in China, nobody would look twice. That was the goal. I opened the notebook to the page. I'd memorized the schedule for the train south to Guangzhou. Nearly 2 full days of travel. I read it once more, put it away. Standing in the ticket line was the most frightening thing I'd done. What if they ask me something? What if they want ID? What if my accent gives me away? I hung back and watched the people ahead of me. The routine was simple: ID, a few keystrokes, a ticket. The clerk barely spoke, just processed and moved on. I ran the sentence through my lips without sound. 1 ticket to Guangzhou. Cheapest seat. The line moved. 2 people. 1 person. The back of my neck went cold. My turn. I pushed the yuan across the counter and said it in Chinese. The clerk glanced up, glanced back at the screen, typed. A ticket slid out. That was it. But the moment it touched my hand, my fingertips went electric. This was real now. The train left at 2 in the morning. I found a corner seat in the waiting hall and pulled my hat low. Around me, people scrolled through phones or dozed. I half closed my eyes, not sleeping, not even close. My ears stayed wide open. Any rapid footsteps, any radio static, any sound that didn't belong. Nothing came, just the ordinary noise of a station at night. A man sat down beside me, smelling of cigarettes, and nodded at me. Where are you headed? I answered the way I'd practiced. Guangzhou. He nodded and went back to his phone. That was the whole conversation. But after he looked away, my palms were soaked. Was my accent off? Did I look strange? Nothing had happened and every muscle in my body had braced for impact anyway. At 2 a.m., I boarded. Nearly 2 days. No sleeper car. Hard seats. Strangers pressed in on both sides. I had a window spot, but I barely looked out. I kept my chin down, eyes low. The safest posture was sleep. Nobody approaches a person who looks asleep. About 3 hours in, the woman beside me held something out. A tangerine. I hesitated. She smiled and held it out again. Have some. Go on. I dipped my head slightly and took it. Thank you. She said something else too fast for me to catch all of it. Something about where I was from. I just smiled and nodded. She seemed satisfied and turned away. I held the tangerine in my palm for a long moment. Small, cold. I peeled it. The smell hit me sharp, sweet. I put a section in my mouth, and my throat locked. I forced it down. This woman had no idea who I was. To her, I was just the person next to her on a train. That had never happened to me before. My whole life, I'd been tagged by country, by unit, by rank, by purpose. On this train, I was no one. Just a woman eating a tangerine someone was kind enough to share. I barely slept for the entire journey. Every time I closed my eyes, the sounds shifted. The drum of these wheels became the drum of the Dandong night train. That cramped dark space came back. The river below the bridge. I'd open my eyes and China would be streaming past the window. I couldn't take out the notebook. Someone would see, so I ran the words in my head instead. Yunnan Province, Xishuangbanna, Mekong River, Myanmar border. The names of where I still had to go, in order, moving on my lips without sound. I stepped off in Guangzhou the following afternoon. The air outside the station was warm. December, but it felt like a Korean autumn. I stopped and stood in it for a moment. That warmth unsettled me. My body didn't know what to do with things that weren't a threat. When everything is unfamiliar, fear arrives first. I needed the bus terminal. There was a route from here to Kunming, in Yunnan Province. I stood outside the station reading the signs, sounding out the characters one at a time. And for the first time, the notebook felt truly alive in my chest. Every word I'd lost sleep over for 7 years, it had been for this. I kept moving. I had to. Word had reached me through overheard conversations on the train. China had dramatically tightened its crackdowns on North Korean defectors in the latter part of 2025. Staying still was not an option. The next page of the notebook held the route from Yunnan to the Myanmar border. I hadn't opened that page yet. The first thing I noticed when I arrived in Yunnan was the smell. Red soil, damp and rich. Nothing like the north. The air itself was different, thick and warm, threaded with the scent of plants I'd never encountered. When I stepped off the bus, I breathed it in deep. So this is what it smells like to be alive, I thought. Xishuangbanna, the southern tip of Yunnan Province where the Mekong flows. From here, the notebook was everything. Tourists moved through this area regularly. A foreigner wouldn't draw attention. I walked like one, unhurried, deliberate, eyes forward. The Myanmar border had to be crossed on foot. No maps. A map purchase leaves a record. All I had were the directions I'd written in the margins of the notebook. And the sound of the river. Keep the Mekong on your right. Walk south. If you can hear the water, you're still on course. That was it. That was all. It had to be enough. I didn't walk during daylight. Visibility meant exposure. I crouched in tree shade through the hottest hours of the day. Those were the longest stretches, just waiting, doing nothing. When the sun dropped, I moved. The jungle at night was solid black. No flashlight. On nights when the moon came through the canopy, I could see a little. When clouds covered it, I couldn't see my own feet. I navigated by feel, the soles of my feet reading the ground. Steering around roots, pivoting away from wet patches. One night, an animal called out. Not close but not far either. Low and long, drawn out. I stopped and held my breath and waited. Sweat tracked down my spine. My feet were trembling. I pressed my back against a tree trunk and felt the bark drag across my knuckles. That sting was almost a relief. Still here, still alive. When the sound finally dissolved into the dark, I walked again. Stopping wasn't an option. I had to be under cover before daylight. 2 nights like that, my body surprised me by holding. I was hungry, truly hungry. My lips had cracked. Blisters had formed on both feet, rubbing with every step. One note from the notebook's margins surfaced: boil river water before drinking. I followed it. Scoop water into my palm, checked the smell. Clay and earth. I gathered branches, kept the fire as small as I could. Any smoke was a risk, and watched it come to a boil. My mother surfaced in my thoughts. She never imagined I'd be doing this. I couldn't collapse before the border. I wouldn't. It was early morning when I crossed into Myanmar. Fog thick in every direction. Gray light pushing through the trees. There was no visible border somewhere in this jungle. A line had been drawn on a map. I had no idea where it was. I kept walking south. Then, through the trees, lights. A village. My knees went loose the moment I saw it. Every part of me wanted to drop to the ground. But this wasn't Thailand yet. I kept going. I hitched a ride from Myanmar to the Thai border on a freight truck. Old and battered, loaded with cargo. I stood at the roadside and raised my hand, and it stopped. The driver and I shared no common language. I pointed south. Then I pressed my palms together and let my face say the rest. He looked at me for a moment, then reached over and opened the passenger door. I pointed to the cargo bed. He nodded. I wedged myself between the freight, pulled my knees to my chest, and held on through the rattling road. Dust and engine oil rising through the wooden slats. It was in that truck bed that I finally fell asleep. When I woke up, the sky was light. The truck had stopped. The driver pointed ahead. Thailand. Pavement beneath my feet. Hard asphalt, the first I'd felt in days. I stood on it for a moment, just stood. I'd never been so glad to feel solid ground. I gestured to a woman outside a nearby shop, and she pointed me toward the bus terminal. I walked. From the bus window, I watched wide green rice paddies slide past. They reminded me of the fields outside. Sinwiju yellow in the fall, harvest ready. I closed my eyes. My mother's face. My brother Sakal. It's not over yet, but the thought arrived anyway. I reached Bangkok that evening. The address of the South Korean embassy was in the notebook. I showed it to a taxi driver. Bangkok's nighttime skyline drifted past the window lights. Stacked upon lights, billboards blazing. The taxi stopped. I looked up. Through iron fencing, a building. A flagpole out front. Something caught the wind and unfurled: blue, red, white. The Taegukji. The South Korean flag. I couldn't move. The sound of it in the wind was the only sound. Then the tears came the same way they had in the dark beneath the train. Not because I chose to cry. Because everything arrived at once: 2 nights in the jungle. The truck bed, the back of my mother's hand. I wiped my face with my knuckles and walked toward the gate. It opened. A staff member looked at me from inside. Where are you from? Korean. The same accent I'd spent 7 years hearing from South Korean passengers on the train. My legs gave out. The staff member caught my arm. Are you all right? I couldn't speak. I nodded. She guided me to a chair and handed me a cup of warm water. I held it with both hands. The warmth moved from my palms up through my arms. That was the first warmth I ever received from Korea. It was February 2026. I entered a place called Hanawon, a resettlement facility that North Korean defectors pass through before beginning life in the South. You may have heard of it in the news. That was where I heard the South Korean dialect for the first time, up close. Same language, but something off about it: the rhythm. The foreign words folded in. When a teacher said something I didn't catch, I raised my hand. Teacher, what does that mean? She smiled and explained. I wasn't embarrassed. Here, not knowing something was allowed. You could just ask. In the North, not knowing was a weakness. You kept it hidden. The strangest thing about Hanawon was the supermarket. One of the program activities was a grocery store visit. I walked in behind the teacher and stopped just inside the entrance. Fruit, stacked in towers: apples, pears, tangerines, bananas, each color different. Each one gleaming under the lights. I picked up an apple. Heavy, firm. I stood there holding it. The teacher's voice came from behind me, warm and amused. Are you buying it? Put it in the cart. That's when I noticed the carts. You pushed one through the store, put in whatever you wanted, paid at the end. That was how it worked. No one thought anything of it. On my first day out of Hanawan, I walked into a convenience store alone. Bright lights, shelves stretching in every direction. Chips, drinks, bread, instant noodles. Refrigerated cases glowing along the back wall. I stood in front of it all and couldn't move. Too many choices. In North Korea, choice wasn't really a concept. You found what existed and made do. That was all there was. I picked a small bottle of something to drink. Went to the register. The cashier said, 1,500 won. I opened my wallet and counted out the bills one by one. Still learning which was which. The cashier waited. Didn't say anything, just waited. I got my change and walked out, and stopped just outside the door. This is what it is, I thought. Knowing that the ordinary things aren't ordinary and feeling that gap for the first time. The first thing I did after settling was search the internet for my mother. Nothing came up. I'd known that would happen. But when I actually typed her name into the search bar, my fingers stopped. I stared at the empty screen for a long time. Where is she right now? Does she know I'm gone? How did she find out? The questions pulled at each other like a current. I closed the browser. I couldn't find Sakal either. He'd still be doing his military service. In those early months, someone connected me with a small restaurant looking for help. Front of house carrying dishes, taking orders. 7 years on a train had given me the muscle memory. But it wasn't the same. When I asked guests to let me know if anything was wrong, they actually did. Casually, even warmly. Oh, could I get a little less ice? Thanks for asking. In the north, when a foreign passenger had a complaint, I wrote it up and reported it to the security monitor. That was my job. Here, the guest's discomfort was something I solved, not something I documented. It took a long time to stop reaching for the report. One evening on the subway home, a woman across from me was watching a drama on her phone. The man beside her had his eyes closed, listening to music. Nobody was watching anyone else. Everyone in their own world. This is just a Tuesday evening for them. I couldn't quite believe I was inside it now. I hope for reunification. My mother is still in the north. So is Sakal. The phrase separated families used to be something I heard on the news. Now it's what I am. When I see elderly Koreans who were divided by the Korean War in 1950. I think I understand a little more now what they've carried. These days, I'm writing in a notebook again. Not Chinese vocabulary anymore. Other things, a Korean word I learned today. Something a customer said that made me smile. Whatever I saw out the subway window on the way home. 7 years of putting words on paper must have left a groove in my hands. The habit stayed. Someday I want to show this notebook to my mother. This is how I lived, I want to tell her. These are the things I wrote down. Mom, I'm doing okay. I want to say that to her directly, not over a phone line. In person, holding her hands, looking her in the eyes. Thank you for being here with me today. I was a train attendant. 7 years, back and forth on the same route, Pyongyang to Dandong, Dandong to Pyongyang. The same journey, over and over. But somewhere along those rails, I was changing. Watching the lights across the river. Filling a notebook with words. Turning an old key over in my fingers. I don't ride that train anymore. But I'm still going somewhere. And now I'm the one who chooses the direction. That was the first thing I learned in this country. Thank you for riding this journey with me to the end.